So now we are going to revisit the three types of structure, which hopefully you already saw that introduction to this towards the start of the module, where we spoke about the three types of structure that we're going to use. So swing structure, internal structure, and fractal structure. Now, the last few lessons, we've kind of broken those down into their individual parts, right? So we spent quite a while really breaking down fractal structure, looking at how we identify those changes of character, right? You've seen how that method is 100% mechanical. I have yet to find a scenario in price action where, it required discretion. It's 100% mechanical. There are no if, buts, or maybes, right? Can be a little bit tricky to get your head around at first, but hopefully with a bit of practice, you should be very familiar with identifying and knowing how to read it. Now, the bit that will, from going forward, will take a bit more experience, which you will learn as you'll get with time, is knowing when and when not to pay attention to it, when and when not to use it, when and when not it is or isn't useful information, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to start to think about more is, when you've now learned how to identify these individual concepts that we use, it's now more about how do we start to put them together to use as a framework to read and understand price action, right? So we can have an expectation of what we think is most likely going to happen next in the market based on probabilities, right? Never certainties, always probabilities. And then that allows us to build trade ideas, right? And that's kind of what we're slowly going to start to do now. Try and put them together. Obviously, it's going to get a little bit more complex, but we'll take our time and do that. So yeah, like I was saying, we've individually looked at fractal structure. So hopefully you should be, somewhat pretty familiar and comfortable with it. I would kind of recommend, if you're not, don't keep plowing through the lessons now. Go back through, do the recommended practice exercises, compare them to the walkthroughs, and get as comfortable as you can with it. And then similarly, we have looked at swing structure, right? We've really kind of broken this down into its own individual parts. You should hopefully now fully understand the rules of how to draw and identify it. And obviously gone through the charts to look at real price action examples of that. But again, now, we're going to start to put these all together to see how we can actually, read price action. So the only piece we haven't gone and looked at on its own is the internal structure, okay? Now, I was originally planning to kind of do its own individual lessons on it, just like we have for swing and fractal. But really, you can't draw your internal structure unless you already are drawing your swing structure. You kind of have to have them both at the same time. So, I just thought may as well just kind of jump straight into putting all three types together now. And I think it will make a lot more sense. So as always, before we jump on the charts and go through actual price action, I just want to go through a couple of, theoretical chart examples, diagrams, just to go over, the rules and the framework in which we use before we go on to actual price action. So this diagram in front of us, this is a slightly more simplified version of the one that we went through in the intro to the three types of structure video, which we'll go on to in a minute. So again, let's just go through this nice and slowly. So in this case, we have bearish swing structure, okay? We have a big swing push down, that sizable swing pullback, okay? So once we get that sizable swing pullback, that either meets, if we're using discretion and we think that's a sizable enough of a swing pullback relative to recent price action, then what can we do? We can put on our pretty circle that says for us that's a swing low. So then we know that when price comes down and breaks and we get a candle body closure below that low, remember for swing boss we need a candle body closure. Once we get that in price action, we then have a confirmed swing break of structure. The exact moment that the candle body closes below that previous swing low and we get that confirmed swing break of structure, what can we then do? We can then use the box method if you need it right, where you draw it between the swing low to where the swing low was broken, and you drag it to the upside, and then the highest point in that box is essentially your new swing high. So that at the exact moment that the candle closes below that break of structure line, we just look back for where was the highest point after this low was printed. Basically, in more simple terms, right, we're trying to find where is the height of that swing pullback. We want to find the highest point of the swing pullback, and that becomes our new swing high, right? That's in essence what we're trying to do there. Then we get another swing move to the downside, okay? So what do we expect after a swing break of structure? We expect a swing pullback to kick in at some point, okay? We never know when it will happen, but we have to start. The moment this happens in the real markets, yes, we can continue to keep looking to short this or hold on to any shorts that we're already within, right, if we're managing those trades. But you just have to always say to yourself the same repetitive line so you never forget, after a swing break of structure, we expect a swing pullback. And if you always tell yourself that, it can really help you to, know when not to be aggressive and keep trying to short this, and to start thinking about management of any shorts you may already be in, okay? It becomes lower probability essentially to keep shorting when we're down here, because we know at any point that pullback can start to happen, okay? And that's kind of the main thing I want you to remember from that. So obviously, once we get that swing breaker structure, we expect the swing pullback. There's a lot of confluence and concepts that we can use to anticipate when this pullback may happen and how we can even try and get in to buy this and get long and trade that, okay? But obviously for this this lesson, but particularly this structure in this module, we're only going to be focusing on market structure, okay? And that's all I want you to be thinking about. And for now, just one time frame as well, okay? So after we get the swing breaker structure and we have, that swing leg to the downside, very often the first thing that's going to happen in terms of bullish structure coming in is you'll get that bullish change of character where we look at the fractal structure. So, when we're literally just looking at those, we're looking at all the candles lows keep breaking. Okay. As soon as one candle fails to break the previous candle's low, that's when we get that fractal pullback. Right, and then we get a pullback and then a continuation of that fractal structure, and then if price breaks it to the upside, that's our bullish change of character, okay? So that's the most aggressive type of structure break, a bullish chalk, right, when the fractal structure changes from bearish to bullish. Now, when that happens, yes, that is the very, very, very first structural indication that that swing pullback may be happening, okay? But it is not confirmation of a swing pullback. We need a bullish internal breaker structure, which is an IBOS, which we'll get into in a minute. That's what confirms the swing breaker structure. And the reason why we use an IBOS, so an internal breaker structure, is because what can often happen in the live market is because, change of character is very, very aggressive, right? We're just literally looking at the little candles. So what can often happen in the live market is when we get these swing breaks of structure to the downside, is you can get price pulling back, right? A little 1 or 2 candles pauses where we get that fractal pullback, price can come down, and then it can break that high and you can get a change of character. And then you could think, okay, well, now we've had a bullish change of character. Now the swing pullback must be starting. And then you try and buy this and get in long. But what can often happen, especially if prices, a lot of momentum to the downside, is you can get stopped out, right? And again, we can have another bullish change of character, and then we can look to buy and you can get stopped out. And you're trying to catch a falling knife and you keep getting caught out. You're seeing the bullish change of characters, but they're not following through. And then the overall swing trend is too strong, okay? And that's why I said, right, change of character is very, very aggressive and it can catch you out a lot. So that's why we have to pair chalk, change of character, with lots of other confluence, okay? Which again, you'll get a feel for this. So the point I'm trying to make here is change of character, when we get that bullish chalk, that just signals at that moment that we're having an internal pullback, okay? And what that means, what internal structure is essentially, it's when you get a pullback or a movement in price, that it's larger than fractal structure. So I'm not just looking at the candles, when you can see like multiple movements like this, but it's not quite big enough for us to deem it to be swing structure just yet, okay? Because what can happen is you can have a swing movement down, a big swing pullback, right? Then you get a break of that low, all right? And then you get a little fractal pullback like that, where it could be a few candles. But sometimes you can get, a bit more of that, a bit more of a pullback, right? And then price continues down. But it's just not quite big enough to be swing structure, okay? It's more of like a little, what we call an internal pullback, okay? So it's not until you get a break of that high here, like an IBOS like that, that's when we have a lot more confirmation now that we're getting the larger swing pullback, okay? So now that would be a swing low, that would be a swing high, right? And that's the swing range we're from within, okay? And that's essentially what internal structure is. So in this instance, it was kind of one impulsive leg down. So there wasn't like that internal pullback like I spoke about. But if there was, then we would look for the price to break that. That would be a bullish IBOS. Okay, this would still be the swing high, this would be the swing low, and then this would be like that swing pullback, okay, in that instance. But sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes you don't get an internal pullback in the leg, and it can be quite impulsive in just one big movement, okay? So then we get the bullish change of character, and at that exact moment that happens, yes, it's an early indication that we may be getting that larger swing pullback, but for now, all the chalk signals is that we're getting an internal pullback, right? It's the start of an internal pullback, because you could get a bit of a movement like this, then you could get a bearish chalk, right? And then we could continue down. And that for me wouldn't be enough to be considered a swing pullback, right? Compared to the recent price action. So that's why in this instance, change of character only signals the start and end of internal structure, right? Internal pullbacks. Then you get a bearish chalk, that would signal the end of the internal pullback, and then we continue down, right? But it's only once you get that bullish IBOS here, when you break the internal structure, that's when we have the true confirmation that we're getting that swing pullback from a structural perspective, okay? But this will become clear as we go through more examples, so don't worry if it's a little bit too confusing at this point. So I know I'm being pedantic here, but I have to go over this loads of times just so it really, really sinks in. So change of character signals the start of a potential internal pullback, okay? So we get that internal pullback, price comes down, okay? And again, we could get another bullish change of character here, and that just signals the end of this internal pullback. And now we're ready to take out this weak high, right? This is a weak internal high because it failed to take out the low. And then when we get that bullish IBOS here and we get that break of the internal high, okay, now we have kind of true structural confirmation that we're going to get this larger swing pullback, okay? So again, IBOS will signal kind of the start and end of a swing pullback. But in terms of when you can define and draw on kind of your gray circle of when you've seen enough of a swing pullback, that will be determined on kind of how you visually see it, if it seems significant enough to you or if you use pip rules. But again, we'll get into this when we look at the price action examples, okay? So change of character signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? So again, we get another bullish change of character that signals the start and end of this pullback. Now we're ready to take out the weak high. Then we actually get that IBOS. Okay, now we're starting to see that structure form. We're getting the swing pullback. Again, we pull back, we come to the downside, and then we get a continuation of that bullish internal structure, okay? So this whole time that this is all happening, everything I just spoke through, remember, the swing structure is bearish because that was the swing breaker structure. That is our swing high. Now we've had a sizable pullback, so we can mark out our swing low. So now we know what swing range we're within, right? As soon as we have enough of a pullback that we deem relevant to be a swing pullback, we can mark that as our swing low, and then we know that we're trading between this swing range. So when the internal structure shifts bullish, when we get that bullish IBOS, right, that's just the internal structure shifting bullish to facilitate a swing pullback, okay? But the whole time, the swing structure is bearish. So what this means is it means that the internal structure is not aligned with the swing structure because the internal structure has to shift bullish to facilitate that larger swing pullback, okay? So as price starts to pull back up and it gets nearer towards this swing high, we know that the swing high is a strong high, right? Why is it strong? Well, it's strong because it did its job. It broke the swing low, right? It caused a break of structure. It took a lot of money to do that. So that's why we know that this is a strong high. So our expectation is as price pulls back up towards it, what do we expect? We expect that price won't break the swing high because we expect that the swing structure will continue until it doesn't, right? We expect that the swing trend will continue bearish. So as we come up towards the swing high, obviously the probability that the pullback is going to be over is increasing now. The nearer we get to the high, right, the higher the probability that this is now ready to finish pulling back. And now we're probably ready to continue the overall swing trend, right, with that next pro swing trend run to the downside. So after we get this bullish IBOS here, right, and we get a little fractal pullback, so like one or two candles sort of pausing, right? You guys should know how to mark out your fractal structure, right? We get another fractal continuation. Okay, fine. This becomes our active fractal low. Then price pulls down and then we get that bearish change of character. Just like how I said down here, when we got the bullish change of character, right down here, that was the first signal that potentially we're getting the swing pullback, right? But at that moment, change of character only confirms the start and end of internal pullbacks, right? So just the same case over here, that bearish change of character where the fractal structure shifts bearish, yes, potentially that's the first early indication now, right? That this swing pullback is finished. This overall swing pullback is finished. And now potentially maybe we're ready to get that next leg to the downside to take out the weak swing low. That bearish chock is the first early indication that may be happening. But remember the framework that we use. Change of character, so fractal structure, only signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? So when we get this bearish chock, we can go, okay, maybe now the swing pullback is finished and maybe now we can target this low, but it's not confirmed until we get the internal structure shifting bearish, okay? Again, I'm going to keep repeating it. I know it's probably way over the top for some of you, but it's really important that you drill this into your mind. So change of character signals the start and end of internal pullbacks, and then IBOS signals the start and end of swing pullbacks, okay? So when we get that bearish chock, yes, we can start to think about potentially we're going to get that move, but in terms of confirmation, at this point, all we can say is that we've had a bearish change of character, so that signals the start of an internal pullback. That's all we can say at this point. we don't have true confirmation of the swing pullback finishing, right, until we get that bearish IBOS. Because what could happen, and sometimes this will happen as you'll see in the live market, is we get that bearish shock here, we start to move to the downside. But remember, this is a strong internal low because it took out the internal high, right? So at this moment, this is the internal high, this is the internal low. So at this moment when price action is here, the internal structure is still bullish. Okay, so swing structure is bearish. We know that this is our swing high and this is our swing low. But the internal structure, right, has shifted bullish. It's making higher highs, higher lows, higher highs. We get the bearish change of character. That signals the start of the internal pullback. And what could happen is it could come into this strong internal low because the internal structure is bullish. We could then get a bullish change of character here, right? And then what does that signal? That signals the end of this internal pullback here, right? And then we could be ready to continue the move, right? And take up this high. And that's what could happen. And potentially we could actually shift bullish on the swing structure. So that's why, if I get rid of all of these lines now to try and clear it up a little bit, that's why we do not have confirmation, true structural confirmation that the swing pullback has finished until we get the IBOS, right? We need the internal structure to realign itself with the swing structure, okay? Because like I said, it could come into here, into this low, it could give us a bullish change of character, the internal structure could then stay bullish, and we could continue for another move, right? And then maybe the swing trend will shift bullish. So once we come down and we actually get that bearish IBOS, and again, for internal structure, we need a counter body close, okay? So we need a counter body close to confirm breaks of structure for everything apart from fractal, because for fractal, we want to be super aggressive, and that's why we can use wick breaks, okay? So we get that bearish IBOS. Now, at that exact moment that we get that candle closure below, just like swing structure, we look back and we look for the highest point. Okay, so internal structure is very similar to swing structure in terms of the same rules that we use, okay? So when we get the break of the internal low, we look for the highest point, right? That took out the low, and that would be here. So that at that moment, we know that this is our internal high, okay? And that will be the internal range we're working from within. So then if we get a bullish change of character, we won't always, like sometimes price will just pull back without one, but if we get a bullish chalk, what does that signal? That signals the start of the internal pullback. So when price starts moving to the upside, what is our expectation at this moment? Well, our expectation is that this is a strong internal high because it took out the low. The internal structure is now bearish. So we're playing between these two orange lines. That's our internal range. So the expectation is that price will not break this high. So when price is coming up to here, right, trying to short this is the highest sort of probability trade, okay? Why is that? Well, it's because the internal structure is now aligned bearish with the swing structure. So we have full structural alignment. This is a strong high, right? This is a strong high. We know that the swing pullback is now likely finished because we've had the bearish IBOS. We get the internal pullback into this strong high. So we're trying to catch this lower high. Everything's now aligned. And now we expect that the internal structure will stay bearish until it takes out this weak swing low. Okay, and that's it. Now, when we get this IBOS here, potentially we may get another pullback. But again, this would be our new strong high, right? Because it took out the low. That would be our new range. We wouldn't expect price to trade any higher than here. And then we can get short and then target that movement, okay? So again, I appreciate there's a bit here to think about. So I'll just kind of give you a quick recap. We have our bearish swing structure, right? We get our swing lower low. We now know that this, right, is our swing high. We get a bullish change of character here. Now at that moment, we can start to think that the swing pullback may be happening. But for now, all we can say is just the start of an internal pullback, okay? So we get that internal pullback, price comes down, and then we get another bullish change of character here, which signals the end of this internal pullback, right? And then we get that IBOS. So now we kind of have true structural confirmation that we're getting that swing pullback because the internal structure has shifted bullish, okay? So we can follow that internal structure, price pulls back down, we expect this low should probably hold, right? And again, we get a break of the weak high and we get another IBOS to the upside, right? So after we get that IBOS, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. It's just the same thing, right? So we come up, we get that bearish change of character. So, okay, now we know the internal pullback is starting, right? So we expect that internal pullback to come into here. But remember, that does not mean that the swing lower high is in place and the swing pullback is finished and we're ready to target this low, because what could happen is price could come into the strong internal low. It could give us a bullish chalk, right? And then it could continue to the upside. So that's why, what do we need to confirm the start and end of this swing pullback? What do we need? We need an IBOS, right? We need the internal structures to shift bearish. And when we get the break of that low, now we have true structural alignment. The internal structure is realigned with the swing structure. That signals the end of this swing pullback. And now the expectation is that the internal structure will remain bearish until it takes out this low, okay? Because then when price pulls back, we may get a bullish change of character to signal the start of the internal pullback. But remember, this is the new strong protected internal high. Price shouldn't trade any higher than that. So when we get that pullback, we want to look for those high probability shorts now to target at least a weak internal low, but it should stay bearish until it takes out the weak swing low. Okay? And that's basically the whole framework in which we use with these three types of structure. Fractal structure, so change of character, signals the start and end of internal pullbacks. And internal structure, when we get those IBOSes, that signals the start and end of swing pullbacks, okay? So we expect a swing pullback. The internal structure shifts bullish to facilitate that swing pullback. Once the internal structure shifts bearish, that signals the end of that swing pullback. And now we expect the internal structure to stay bearish until it takes out that weak swing low. And then you repeat the same process. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We'll go through some examples on the charts, and I'll just quickly kind of show you that more sort of complicated example we had at the start, right? It's the exact same thing, but obviously this is the bullish scenario. Again, I won't go over this super slowly, but hopefully you can see it, right? Swing higher high, we pull back, we then break that high, we have that break of structure, so we now know that this is our new swing low. After a swing break of structure, what do we expect? We expect a swing pullback, right? But it's not always going to happen straight away. So we can look for structural confirmation to tell us, okay? So when we're getting that swing movement to the upside, we're expecting a swing pullback. What do we need to tell us that the swing pullback, has confirmed or has started from a swing structural perspective? We need an IBOS. We need the internal structure to shift bearish. So this is an example where price comes up and we do actually get a reasonably big pullback, right? Bigger than a fractal pullback, but it's not quite big enough for it to be, classified as a swing pullback relative to recent price action. And then it continues to the upside. Okay, so that can happen. So we still haven't had a swing pullback yet. We're still moving to the upside. And that would be our current, internal low. Then we get a bit of a fractal pullback. We continue to the upside, but then the fractal structure shifts bearish. So we get a change of character. So at this point, we can start to think, okay, maybe now the swing pullback is going to kick in, but it's not confirmed until what? It's not confirmed until we get the bearish IBOS. So at this point in the live market, we get the bearish chalk. We only have confirmation that we're getting an internal pullback into this low. Because remember what could happen? We could do this, right? And then we could get a bullish chalk, and then we'd expect the internal structure to continue, okay? So that's why we have to wait for what? Wait for the bearish IBOS. Once we get the candle close below that internal low, we know this is our new internal high, right? This is the internal range we're working from within. We get a bit of an internal pullback, and now we can look to short this to try and play the swing pullback, okay? And that's basically it, right? So then we can follow the internal structure as price is pulling back. Obviously, then the nearer we get towards this strong swing low, because remember, the swing trend is bullish, right? This is our swing high, this is our swing low. The nearer we get to the swing low, the higher the probability that the swing pullback will finish, and we're ready to take on that move. So we have to be thinking about that, right? So as we then get a bullish change of character here, as we come into the strong low, okay, maybe now the swing high low is in place and we're ready to take out that high. But remember, change of character only signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? And at this point, that's the strong internal high because the internal structure is bearish, right? That's the internal low. So we pull back up into this internal high, we come up to here, we fail to take out the internal high, we get a bearish change of character. Okay, this internal pullback is now finished because we've had the bearish chalk. Now price is very likely going to be ready to take out the weak internal low. So we get another bearish IBOS, okay? So we get rid of some of these orange lines. So then we get that bearish IBOS. This becomes our new internal high, right? This is our internal low. Again, we get another bullish change of character, signaling the start of this internal pullback. But in this instance, price does have enough juice to take out the internal high, right? So we get that bullish IBOS here. Now what's happened is now when we get that bullish IBOS, what does that signal? That signals the end of the swing pullback. Why? Because the internal structure has realigned itself with the swing structure. Now everything's aligned to ready to take out the weak swing high. Okay, so we get an internal pullback. This should be the new strong internal low, right? Because that's the internal range we're working within. So this trade here becomes a very high probability trade to look to buy this because this is when everything is aligned, right? So then again, that signals the end of that internal pullback. Now price is ready to at least take out this high. But the expectation, once we initially get this bullish IBOS here, and once the internal structure realigns itself with the swing structure, then this is a really key rule, right? This will help you. The expectation once that happens, again, not a guarantee, but the expectation once we get that bullish IBOS and it realigns itself, the expectation is that the internal structure will remain bullish until it takes out the weak swing high, right? So we can keep buying these strong higher lows, right? We expect that price will not break this low when it pulls back. Again, we get another bullish IBOS. We expect that price will not break this low because it's a strong low. So that means we can keep aggressively buying higher and higher up in the swing range to try and target the break of this high once we have that structural alignment. Cool. So hopefully that starts to make sense now, right? Swing break of structure, we need the internal structure to shift bearish to signal the start of the swing pullback. We get that with the bearish IBOS. We then expect the internal structure to stay bearish until it facilitates that swing pullback. Only once we get the bullish IBOS, which occurs here, okay, now that signals the end of the swing pullback, and now we expect those bullish internal ranges to hold until it takes out the high. And that's basically it. And what change of character helps us with is just showing the start and end of those swing pullbacks. It gives us a little bit more of an aggressive and early sign that structure is shifting, okay? Cool, so again, I appreciate that's a lot to take in. It can seem like there's a lot of moving parts, but we'll go through some examples on the charts, and with time and practice, it will really start to sink in. But this is a very mechanical framework that will, when you get your head around it, it will just give you such a deep understanding of price action, and it will give you so much clarity when you're looking at the market. So without further ado, let's dive into some actual real price action examples.